All right, let's dive into today's podcast episode. And I need to start out with the moment that my grandpa looked me dead square in the eyes and said, Alison, is this legal? Okay, let me back it up and tell you why and how this whole thing started. My grandpa was a huge fan of anything that I did. He basically raised me from about junior high and on, he and grandma. And he and grandma would come to the warehouse all the time. They would come over either to my house if I was working at home, or they would come to the warehouse, check things out, still all the Laffy Taffies that were sitting on the table. And while they were there checking things out, grandpa would always come to me and say, Alison, what are you selling today? And of course, I would show him and he would inspect it and say, okay, that's good. Or people buy that. And he would always be super inquisitive. And I remember one time I showed him cupcake liners and they had polka dots on them, something very simple, something very basic. And he said, Alison, these are cupcake liners. Can't people buy them at every grocery store? Why are people buying cupcake liners from you? And I just kind of smiled. I'm like, Grandpa, come on, they're cute cupcake liners. And he said, all right, how much did you sell? And I sat down on my computer, I hit refresh, and I said, look, Grandpa, we just passed $20,000. And he looked at me. He was so serious. And he said, Alison, is this legal? Is what you just made $20,000 on cupcake liners? And I bust up and just started laughing so hard. And I said, yes, Grandpa, I have something called an online store and I sell to my customers. And he went on to be like, but you're still sitting in your pajamas for the day. And I said, I know, it's magic. I don't have to be anywhere. I can just do this from my home or if I'm down at the warehouse. And so he was blown away by that. And I got a good laugh from it. And I started to tell him, like, Grandpa, I don't just sell cupcake liners. I sell what the cupcake liner can do. And I went on to tell him that my customer was a stressed out mom who usually had newborns or toddlers, and they were just trying to survive the day. And they would get to the end of the day after they put the kids in bed and they would go into the kitchen and they would see a huge pile of dishes that they had to do for the day. And it was just one more thing that was weighing on them. And so what I did is instead of selling, hey, make these cute cupcakes, the moms are going to feel like, oh, here's another thing that I have to do. So how can I turn this and make this a benefit for the mom? And I said, hey, these cupcake liners are actually a way to help you do less dishes. I know how many snacks your kids are asking for during the day. So instead of pulling out a plate after plate after plate that you have to keep washing, why don't you just stick the snacks in the cupcake liner and then you can throw the cupcake liner away so you can get to bed a little bit earlier. And that's how we sold out, is because these cupcake liners solved the problem of my client. And my grandpa's like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And I think this is such a great example of when you tell people what the product does versus what the product is, right? A cupcake liner versus, hey, let this help you get to bed earlier because it's going to help you do less dishes. That is the thing that people want. They want the results. They want the thing that's going to help them solve the problem. That is the thing that's going to give you the advantage to selling over your competitors. So what I wanted to do today is I'm actually bringing in a guest that talks about how to infuse, how to add in storytelling, AKA story selling, into your product lineup so that people fall in love with the solution versus fall in love with the product. So get ready to take notes because Jude is going to give you the tips and the tricks to help you make this happen in your business. All right, let's go. Jude Charles, so glad you're here. You have been termed King of Storytelling through the grapevine. A couple of friends have told me about this. Will you tell us, just give us a little backstory of who you are, and then we'll dive into some things.
Sure. 17 years old in a TV production classroom. I'll never forget 2006 is the year. And my teacher, Mrs. Donnelly, looks at me one day and she says, Jude, you're really, really talented at video production. You should start a business. And then the following day, she came into the classroom with a yellow envelope. Now, Mrs. Donnelly told me this on May 4th, 2006, but I didn't take her seriously. And I couldn't even fathom what it meant to be an entrepreneur because I'm the youngest of 10 children. My father worked as a construction worker. My mom worked at a chair factory. So there weren't any entrepreneurs in my family. But in that yellow envelope, May 5th, 2006, Mrs. Donnelly, she handed me this yellow envelope. Inside of this yellow envelope was my first set of business cards.
Mm.
And since then, it has been 16 years since that day. I wake up every morning helping entrepreneurs to tell their story. The deliverable happens to be videos and films. I specifically create documentaries for entrepreneurs, but I also help them craft it before we ever press record. And that is somewhat of a short story of how I've gotten here today. But even in that introduction, you notice what I did, and I want to break it down. I told you about a very specific moment in time. That's
Yeah.
all a story is a very specific moment in time. Now, sometimes there will be more dramatic stories. Sometimes there will be funny stories. But this one just happened to be a very short story of a teacher who believed in me so much that she would go buy me business cards so that I could start the business. That is my story and how I've gotten here today. And how I'm speaking with you today is I share that story over and over and over so that people will get in the first introduction. I think we've only been recording for like the first 2 minutes. You get an understanding of who Jude Charles is beyond the thing that he does.
Okay, so I got to find out because my brain's asking this question. Do you still have those business cards?
I do. So I still have, it's a great question. I still have one on my desk. And if you're watching the video, like I still have it. The very first one, it's framed up. And Mrs. Donnelly, yeah, I still talk to her to this day. She's still teaching, almost close to retirement, but I still talk to her to this day, and I would not be here if it
As
were
you were
not for her.
telling that story in my head, I was like, how could I do that? Like, I love how you were so inspired by this teacher. It made me stop and say, who can I give business cards to? Not real business cards, but how can I help inspire? And I loved how you didn't say, Alison, go inspire people. You told a story that I'm going to remember forever when I see your name, when I associate with you about, oh, I need to go do that.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
okay, you told us this beautiful story. We're finding out why story is so important. Why do you have to tell stories with e-commerce? You know, I'm in e-commerce. You know, I teach my students how to sell physical product. How do you bring storytelling into selling a physical product?
You make meaning of. So products are things, right? They can be seen as commodities. But when, let's just say hypothetically, you're selling a candle.
Mm-hmm.
What makes this candle important? Why should I buy this candle versus any other candle that's on the market, right? You make meaning of it. Stories make meaning of this actual candle. In 2009, there was 2 journalists who did a research project called Significant Objects, and they bought trinkets online. So ugly trinkets online. They bought it from eBay, and they bought it for like 50 cents, 75 cents, just really cheap things. 100 different items. I think in total it was about $127. The research project was that they would resell these items online on eBay, and the only thing they would add to it is a story. Well, Alison, they did that. And when the total came back from selling these items back on eBay, remember, the only thing that changed was the storytelling. They added a story to it. They sold the same items that they bought for $127. They sold for $8,000.
Oh my gosh. Do you know that site's still up today? Have you
That
checked
site
out
is
that
still
site?
up. The site is still up, and I have the book. I have the book that has all the stories in it. The reason that I share that research project is because, again, when I talk about making meaning of, the only thing they did was they just added a story that now this trinket that was worth 50 cents is now worth, to some people, $41 or $100 because there was a story added to it. There was a meaning. There was a moment in time that was brought to this item that now made it more meaningful. Candle, you can do the same thing. I have a story that I share with white shoes that I'll share later on, but it's the same thing. You make meaning of it, and when you make meaning of it, it becomes more valuable, and people now are bought into not just the item, right? They're bought into the brand. They're bought into the why, the bigger idea behind this product. And so, yeah, I think that's why storytelling is so valuable, so important. It makes what you're doing, the thing that you're selling, extremely valuable.
Okay, so how does one do this? Like that significant object site, I have to set a timer because I'll get over there and I'm laughing so hard, and 3 hours later, I am not even close to being done with that site.
Yeah,
And everybody
yeah.
listening will leave a link to site that we're talking about, and you promise us that you will set a timer so you'll actually get the work done of building stories. So how does one even start to write a story? I know you're saying a specific moment in time, put meaning behind it. Take that candle, for instance. How do you really put a meaning or story behind an object that just feels like an object?
The candle example, let's say you name the candle, and let's just say hypothetically it's called the perseverance candle, or maybe it's called the go after it candle. What does that mean? What does that look like? That's just a statement. That's just a word, right? Why did you decide to name it that? So that's the first place to start. You're creating this product like a candle. Why? What is the vision behind it? For example, like I think with a candle, again, I talked about perseverance. Tell me about a moment in time where you had to persevere and you were scared. You didn't think that you could do it, right? This past Labor Day, I'm 33 years old. And for the very first time, I learned how to swim at 32. And so this past Labor Day, we're at my friend's uncle's house and we're having a good time, but I'm excited because I can get into the pool for the first time and actually enjoy it and really swim. And so I do that. There's like 8 of us there, barbecuing in the pool, having fun. I do that. I get in the pool and I'm doing backstrokes. I'm doing like moves and I'm just having fun with it. Well, 2 hours in, Alison, I go from the deep end to go to the shallow end. I just swimming, normal laps like I've been doing. And halfway through that, I go to put my feet down because I think I got tired. And so I go to put my feet down, but I can't feel the base of the pool. So I begin to panic. And because I begin to panic, I start to take in water. And
Oh,
now I'm beginning to drown. And so I'm not too scared at first because I'm like, hey, like, all right, there's people around. I know they're watching me because they know I haven't been able to swim. Now they're kind of surprised I know how to swim. So I flap my hands above water to kind of call for help, to let them know, hey, I need help in this moment, right? No one comes. I do it again. I get my hand above water. No one comes. So I allow my body to sink to the bottom of the pool. And then with all the energy that I have, I jump from the bottom of the pool all the way up to the top. And as soon as I broke ground, I broke water, I scream out, help. And luckily, my best friend that was there, Nia, she dives in the pool and comes to save me, to try to save me. Now, Nia is 5'2", 130 pounds. I am 5'9", 180 pounds. And Nia has to figure out how to get me out of this pool in order to save me. And luckily, she figures it out. I'm sitting on the edge of the pool and I'm just trying to take breath in because I really thought this was it. About 30 minutes passes by and her mom comes to me and she says, hey, Jude, let's get back in the water. We don't have to go to the deep end, but let's just, stay on the shallow end, but get back in the water. And as cool as a cucumber, I try to tell her, no, I'm cool. I don't want to get back in. And she says to me, Jude, I'm 55 years old. I've allowed a lot of things to keep me from doing the things that I want to do in life. But one thing I know is that when you're afraid to try again, just do it. Because on the other side of that fear, you'll realize that, yeah, you might have messed up once or twice, but that doesn't mean you can't do it. So try again. I just told you that story about me drowning, almost drowning, and then her mom telling me to try again. Well, I did try again. But if I were to attach that story to this perseverance candle or the go after it candle, now I've brought more meaning to it. Like I'm watching you as you're listening to me tell this story and you're bought in, right? That is what changes it. So what you think of is, let's just say, again, if it's a candle, what is the moment in time that represents, that illustrates what this candle represents, right? It doesn't mean that that is the specific moment you created the candle. It doesn't have to be that. Now, if I were selling candles, like I could say, hey, after that moment, I was really inspired. And so I wanted to create a candle that reminded people to try again, right? That when you're sitting in front of the computer and you're getting ready to work on a presentation that you may not know if it's going to go really well, just try it anyway, right? But instead of saying that statement, I gave you a story that's attached to it. So how do people do this? You write out the word. Like I mentioned, I thought of perseverance. Okay, what's a story that illustrates perseverance? Or maybe I worked with a client once who sold lipsticks online, and she would sell these crazy colored lipstick, blue lipstick, orange, green. And she would have these funny names for them, but the funny names, it wasn't, again, just the lipstick. What did this represent? Why is this lipstick so important? With her project specifically, we did a documentary and we did a 3-part series, and it was all about women empowerment, being comfortable in your own skin. right? So again, it's like, how do you do this? You think of the one word, you work backwards. What is it that I want this to represent? Maybe perseverance, go after, or maybe just be crazy, right? It'll be okay being crazy. But what's a story that illustrates that? What brings meaning to that? And it doesn't have to be a long, drawn out story. Sometimes it could be a story told in 30 seconds, but it makes meaning of that item, that product in a way that brings more value to your customer that's buying it.
Okay, so I love that. And it makes so much sense because now when I see a perseverance candle, I'm going to think of you and swimming. But that story was told probably in about 4 minutes ish.
Mm-hmm.
People don't read as much as they used to. And
Mm-hmm.
now people are being trained for 7-second videos on TikTok. How can you squish that much of a story in bullet points and descriptions and TikTok to be able to get that same bought in feeling? Because we have to do that with social media now, right? Like if we write these big, huge books on stories, we need to switch our marketing a little bit more. So how do you recommend squishing those stories down?
So two things. One, I would say depth versus width, which I do think people read if you give them something worth reading.
Oh, true. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So that's the first thing. But the second thing is, let's just say TikTok specifically. Let's say you post a video behind the scenes of you making the product, right? Again, let's go a different route. Let's say you're creating watches and you're showing the behind the scenes of the watch being assembled. That can only be a 15-second thing.
Yeah.
But then when you go to create the caption for it, or even the audio, as you're saying something, bringing them into the specific moment in time that matters most. So I'll give you an example. I know a fitness coach who coaches women who are over 40, and she received this text message from her client of an empty airplane. And in the text message, the client says, "This is the first time in my life," keep in mind she's over 40, "This is the first time in my life I haven't had to ask for a seatbelt extension."
Wow.
Exactly. But that's the story. That's it. The moment that she gets this text message and she doesn't have to ask for a seatbelt extension anymore. And it illustrates, you allow people to fill in the gaps. People are smart, right? And so you don't have to say, "Oh, I'm the best fitness coach there is out there. Here's the workouts that we can do." You fill in the gap with, "Here's the moment in time I knew the impact that I really had on a client." So to answer that question, yes, I still think you can do long posts because I actually happen to do that. I don't do it on TikTok. I do it on Instagram, where I will create maybe a 15-second video, but in that video or in the caption, there's a long story being told. But I also think you look for that very specific moment that has the most impact. There's another story I tell about this past May. I was working for a client. Someone came in and robbed us of $20,000 worth of equipment.
Oh my gosh.
But the way I end that story is, they may have come in to rob us of the equipment, but he couldn't rob me of my purpose. Now, that one specifically I'm telling you, because when you go to look at that online, it's not a long drawn out story of like exactly how it happens. Now, there is a long way I tell that story, but to your point, you can also condense it to the very specific thing that's happening. And what are you thinking, feeling, or seeing in that moment? And so if you're looking to only, let's just say it's 200 words or 100 words, let's just make it really simple. You only want to write 100 words. You condense it down to a very specific moment, because sometimes there could be multiple moments within the moment. But the very specific moment that you can just illustrate, that you can show versus tell, this is what's happening. The show in the seatbelt story was the empty airplane. You got the text message, empty airplane, this is what it means. When I got robbed, the video that I used was of me working out. And I think I said, "For everything you've been praying for, be prepared to sacrifice." Right? Or actually, another one that's a really great example. Someone asked me, which I know you'll probably ask me, how does someone get better at storytelling? And my response is, you just have to put in the reps. And so you see a video of me working out with the caption of talking about Kobe Bryant working out and him having to put in the reps. Again, it illustrates the point. It illustrates a very specific moment in time that helps you understand. That helps not even you understand, it helps another person understand what it is that you mean by put in the reps. You make a visual representation of it. It can be long, it can be short, but give them a reason to actually want to read it.
Do you have a framework for it? Because I know some people are saying, start with the most exciting thing first, and then a brief explanation, and then sandwich it all together. Do you have some type of framework that you can share?
First, a story is it consists of a hook, a journey, and then the lesson that you learn from the story. So the hook, The hook is like the first few words that you can get someone to care about the story that you're writing. Drop them into the middle. That's usually the best way to get started with a story. Just drop them in the middle. I think with the robbery story, I started by saying my team and I had to fill out a police report. Immediate curiosity, immediate, wait, what's happening? Why are you filling out a police report?
Mhm.
Drop them right into the middle. There's other ways to do it, but that's the easiest way, fastest way. That's the hook. The journey itself is what is happening in this moment. What are you thinking, feeling, or seeing? You don't want to just tell statements about what's happening. Again, the way that I told the story with the robbery, I showed what I was feeling in the moment, which was, how could this happen? In my 16 years of being in video production, this has never happened before. How could this be happening right now in the middle of a big project? So that's the journey. Take me through, walk me through. Or let's take the seatbelt example again. We're seeing a picture of the empty airplane, and then we're understanding what this woman is thinking. This is the first time in my life I haven't had to ask for a seatbelt extension. Now you can infer your own feeling about that moment, which is maybe she no longer has to feel embarrassed or feel anxious to ask. But that journey, that middle part is, what are you thinking, feeling, or seeing? The lesson is, okay, I've told you about this journey. What is the lesson from that journey? What is the theme? What is the idea? That is usually the framework that I use. But as you can tell, I've told you maybe 3 stories that have happened this year alone. This is probably the most important tactic or strategy for getting better at telling stories, for having the right framework, is you need to sit down and write out the stories that are happening to you every single day. There are stories happening to us. I happen to recommend doing that in a story bank journal. In the same way that when you go to the bank, you can only withdraw what's in the account, you can only withdraw the stories that you have deposited into your journal. And so you won't always get all the stories right. Not all the stories will work. But what's most important is that you write down the stories, because when you write them down, then you can pull and say, oh, no, this will be a really great story that illustrates this idea that I want to share. I'll give you one last example. I worked on a project with a client named Darnielle Jervy Harmon. She is a business coach. And Darnielle has this idea that she teaches based on spiritual principles. So to get better at businesses, you got to get really good at your relationship with God. And one of the ideas is about vision. And so, again, vision is just an idea. What's a story that illustrates that? She tells a story about her journey through motherhood and how it has been difficult for her. She got married at 42, and her husband tried to start having kids. And obviously, when you're an older woman, it becomes more difficult. There's more complications. But what she did was her and her husband created a nursery for the children that do not exist yet. What they have created is a vision, a moment that they know will happen, but it hasn't happened yet. Again, you've taken this idea of a vision or spiritual principles and you've made it practical. Tell me about the moment in time that makes it practical, that illustrates it in a very easy way.
Okay. A question. When you're writing these daily stories in the story bank, do you have a Google Doc? Do you do it in a notebook so that you can reference them quickly? Because there's been times where I'm like, oh, that's going to be such a good story. But then you lose it. So how do you keep it organized?
In the beginning, I started with writing it down in a journal. And the most important parts are the 3 parts I mentioned: the hook, the journey, the lesson. Now, the hook is a little bit different the way that I write it in my journal. The hook is actually just the title. I have a funny story that I haven't used really, but I remember it because I look back at my journal often. It's called Uber Driver by Day, Musician by Night. And it's a story about an Uber driver who played their music for me. And it was a funny thing that happened throughout it. But I'll write out the title. And that title is kind of like the hook for me and a way for me to remember it. And then I'll write out the story. So the journey of what actually happened. And then the lesson. What I would highlight, though, is that title and the lesson, so that I can go back and let's just say I'm writing a new email for the day. And I'm thinking, what lesson do I want to teach? I know the lesson. Let's say it's intimidation or it is putting in your reps. Then I'd go back and look at the titles. I'll quickly scan the titles. That's the physical way. I started that way. What I do today, though, is I have the app Notion where you can take down notes and create whole databases and all that. I use Notion. But let's just say, let's take one like Google Sheets. You have one column that is just the title of the story, another column that is the story, but then the final column is the one word or a few words about the lesson, the theme. That way you can quickly scan it when you are looking to create something, or your team can go back and scan it and say, oh, this would be a really great story. What do you think? Right. That's the other reason that I like having the idea of the story bank journal, because it allows, as you grow and scale your business, it allows other people to be a part of a process, but they need to know what those stories are. Right. They need to understand what that is. And so I still use my physical journal, but sometimes I will also write in Notion. That is the app that I happen to use to keep it. But those three things just make it easy so that it can be done daily. I don't take a lot of time. I take maybe 5-10 minutes to write out the title, a couple notes about what actually happened so you don't forget. Not, you don't have to sit and make it perfect, but you do when you go back to use that story, that's when you make it perfect. You refine it and you realize, okay, here's all the details that actually happened. And then the lesson. The lesson is the most critical piece, because then you can work backwards. Once you know what the lesson is, you can work backwards and scan for just the lesson. Maybe you don't need to remember the title. You just scan for the lesson and then you could pull it out from there.
Do you always recommend writing in first person? Like, I experienced this, because I'm thinking about e-commerce, and do you ever approach it as, have you ever felt this? Or is it more first person?
It's both. So actually it's three things. I agree with, like, yeah, have you ever felt this? It's kind of like a question that invites them in. Sometimes I will also use it in first person where I'll just explain what happened in the moment. But a third one that I like, that I try to use often, is I use TV shows or stories that are told from books. And those are just told from a third person point of view. But that's another great way, because some people are really, I always recommend you start with that, because some people just don't like sharing about themselves. But I think the more you see the power in stories in general, you realize, wait, I should start telling stories about myself too. But those are the three ways I would say, like, yes, first person for sure, moments that are happening to you. Here's what happened today. But then, has this ever happened to you? Invites them in. That's a great prompt. That's a great hook as well, right? That's a different type of hook where you're asking the question. But then the third one is, I can tell you a story about this funny moment that happened on a TV show, or I can tell you about this moment that really inspired me from a TV show, from a movie even. I recently watched, what was it called? Tickets to Paradise with George Clooney and Julia Roberts. And there's a story he tells. I wrote it down as The House of Ashes. That's not what he titled it, but that's just how I remember it. But he tells a story about, like, his relationship with his ex-wife and how initially he was building this home for his wife, and then the home burnt down. But anyway, the point is, I actually went and looked up the script so that I could copy and paste it. But later on, whenever I use it, I haven't used it yet, but whenever I use it, I will actually rewrite it as, maybe, let me tell you about a story that really inspired me to keep in mind what really matters, or to keep the first things first, right? Like, I think Stephen Covey is the one that coined that term, keep first things first. Let me tell you about a story that actually illustrates that reminds me to keep the first things first. So that's the way I would recommend it. I don't want to make it too complicated. The point is to get started with the story bank journal specifically, because I can give you frameworks and I can give you, here's the exact way to do it. The story is a specific moment in time. Write the story. Once you have it, you can refine it in any way that you need to. When we talk about maybe doing only 100 words on Instagram or TikTok, or maybe on your product page, you actually have the full story written out. Because like you said, with the significant objects project, you get to the site and now an hour has passed because you're just reading all these stories. I think it's important to just have them, though. What happens with entrepreneurs is we don't work on the stories because sometimes we don't think it's important, or we don't want to talk about ourselves. If you get into the habit of writing down stories from, like, TV shows or books that you're reading, then you can start to write out your own stories and really get into the habit of telling stories.
I like how you're saying this, because as you were talking now, business cards will remind me of you. Candles, swimming will remind me of you. And I think that's so true about our businesses. I talk about Chick-fil-A a lot, or I went for a whole year eating, Jude, don't judge me, a box or two of Milk Duds every single day.
Oh, wow.
It was a thing. And then when we had a Milk Dud shortage, people were sending me boxes of Milk Duds on my porch. And it was just so fascinating how I was telling the story, and the most random things would make people think of me. That's what storytelling does. It keeps the business, it keeps the brand, it keeps the product, it keeps the entrepreneur first of mind when people are out in the world and they're driving by a Chick-fil-A, or they're walking down the aisle of Milk Duds, which I have not eaten a Milk Dud for almost an entire year. I think I deserve a badge on that one. That was a hard withdrawal.
Definitely deserve a badge for that. That was a very interesting habit to have for a
I
whole
know
year.
it's such a bad habit, but it's because my dentist told me not to do it. And when we're told not to do something, what do? We do it.
Yep.
So
Yep.
it's my dentist's fault, of course. But I just think that is so pertinent, like attaching those stories to it so that we become top of mind for our customers when they're out there. Okay. So I know you've been on here and giving all this good information. You were doing social media, of course. We're doing product descriptions. Where else can we tell these stories online?
Social media, website, internally, I think is another great one when you're in meetings or like, now this isn't specific to online because I'm going to come back to it in a second. But let's say you're doing a brand partnership deal. Internally using these stories, some of the same stories, if not different ones, that help this brand understand what it means to partner with you. That it's not just another transaction. What that does is it creates a different relationship with this brand where they'll promote you more online. Before we got started with this, I told you about a mutual friend of ours that we have, Mel Abraham. And Mel
Love you,
heard me
Mel.
Mel heard me speak on another podcast, and he was just like, I've got to find this person. Now, me and Mel haven't done a deal or anything like that, but we're friends. But the reason we're friends is because he got to hear my story, right? When you're building relationships, in my opinion, are first built offline before they're built online. And that's why I wanted to start with this route. When you're meeting with people, when you are doing these deals and partnerships, they might discover you online, but when you take it offline, that's when the relationship is really begin to build. And then that's when you notice like these brands are going hard for a certain influencer or for a certain entrepreneur, is because that relationship was built outside of being online. So that's another way. Internal meetings, whether it's with your team or with a brand partner, even when you're out speaking, let's say you're out speaking for your brand, that's another way to do it. But I think, the biggest ways online have been website and social media. That is the place where people find you. They discover you. Facebook ads is another, right? Insta ads in general are another. I'm trying to think of the other places, but that online specifically, that is the best places is your website. When people are going through your website on your about page, I think even for this, what I sent you was my about page that actually tells my story, that gives you an idea of who I am and what I'm about. But then the product pages, even in the receipt. So we did this project once with a client, the one that I told you about with the lipsticks. In the receipt of the email, she didn't depend on the fact that people had already seen the documentary. She would link, you get the receipt in an email that says, hey, thank you for purchasing. But then she'd link the video that we have done in that email receipt. Hey, in case you haven't watched our documentary that shows exactly why I created this, here's an opportunity to watch it, right? So that's another moment that's similar. It's online, it's digital, but it gives you a way to make sure people are watching or reading the stories about what this brand represents. I happen to be wearing Warby Parker glasses, and Warby Parker has these cleaning cloths that they give out. On the cleaning cloth is their story in 100 words.
Oh, wow.
Right? So online brand, you can, well, in the beginning when they first started, you can only buy it, I think, online, and now they have physical stores. But again, that's another way to think about it. Online isn't just the website and social media. It's just what happens throughout the process that reinforces your story, reinforces your brand, even after the person has bought it. Like I said, for me, like I always think about this because the very first time I got it, I actually sat down and read the story. It's in 100 words. Like I read it now. It says, once upon a time, a young man left his glasses on an airplane. He tried to buy new glasses, but new glasses were expensive. Why is it so hard to buy stylish glasses without spending a fortune on them? He wondered. He returned to school and told his friends, we should start a company to sell amazing glasses for non-insane prices, said one. We should make shopping for glasses fun, said another. We should distribute a pair of glasses to someone in need for every pair sold, said a third. Eureka. Warby Parker was born. The moment in time that gives the origin story of why this brand exists, right? I think that's another way that you could think about how do I reinforce the stories about what is happening in my life that also makes meaning of the products or the e-commerce that we are selling online.
I love it. I love it. I agree that putting that on something that people use over and over and over again is brilliant. Then no wonder why they're such a big, huge company. It's because they're brilliant behind their marketing and their storytelling.
Yeah.
Okay, so people are listening and they're thinking, all right, Jude, where else can I find more information about you? I know you've written a book. I know you've been producing documentaries for Steve Harvey, for other visionary CEOs, even for Google. How do people find out more about you, or if they want to reach out for you for help? What's the best way to do that?
So there's two ways. I write a newsletter called the Dramatic Leverage newsletter, which talks about how do you make money from your stories. JudeCharles.co/list is the place to sign up for that newsletter. The second place, let's just say you want to get your story bank started. I have created a digital story bank journal. And by the time this comes out, probably a physical story bank journal. I've been working on it. It's not out yet, but the digital version is available, storybankjournal.com. But again, I think the best place to start is to begin to write out these stories. We all have stories. If you're alive and breathing, every person has a story. The products that you're creating has a story behind them. Maybe it's an overarching brand story like Warby Parker and their glasses. Like they don't have a story for each set of lenses. Or it could be specific to the product that you're creating. Story Bank Journal, get started on telling your stories every single day that you could be sharing over and over. And so, storybankjournal.com, get started on telling your stories today.
Love it. Love it. Well, this was really good. I took lots of notes.
I enjoyed it. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time and having me on.
Were you captivated by Jude's stories today? Oh my gosh. I am telling you, every time I see a candle, I'm going to think of him being in that swimming pool and then being brave enough to go back in. This is the power of storytelling/story selling. All right. So here are my top 10 takeaways, things that really grab my attention. You ready? Number 1, stories can make items or products a heck of a lot more meaningful. Jude shared that website called Significant Objects, and it showed how cheap people got products, added a story to them, and how much they were able to sell them for. If you go to that website, just set a timer because you'll be there forever laughing at those stories and saying, I can't believe they got that much for an item that you've probably seen at a secondhand store for pennies. All right, number 2, choose a word that represents your product, then work backwards to create a story that illustrates just that. For example, Jude talked about the perseverance candle and then connected it to his swimming experience. Number 3, give your customers something worth reading and remembering. Nobody wants to read a boring product description or a social media post, right? Create a story that captures their attention and makes them want to be and makes them feel like they're part of the experience. Number 4, condense stories into what you were thinking, feeling, or seeing. Stories don't have to be super long to captivate people. It can actually be a few words about your experience in a single moment, like the smell of churros at Disneyland. Enough said, right? Number 5, put in the reps. Just like anything else, you need to practice when it comes to storytelling. Start by just sitting down, writing the stories that happen to you every single day. They don't have to be long. Remember, they can be short. Number 6, stories have to have a hook, a journey, and then a lesson. You've got to grab someone's attention with a hook. That's the title. That's the, oh my gosh, I got to click onto it. Then you move into the glimpse of the story, which is what you're thinking and feeling. And then you add the takeaway, which is the lesson. Think of Jude's story about the woman who no longer needed the seatbelt extender. It wasn't long. It wasn't complicated, but very memorable. Number 7, use an app like Google Docs or your notes on your phone or something called Notability to capture your stories. Apps are great because you don't have to carry your notebook around wherever you go. You can make these quick little notes on your phone wherever you are when those ideas come in, and then you can bring them back and write them on paper or organize later, but you don't want to have to remember the thing, the story, your feelings later. Just write it down and get it out of your head until you're really ready to work on it. Number 8, attach stories of something familiar to your brand because it will help keep you top of mind. People send me DMs or tag me in posts about Chick-fil-A all the time. Why? Because I talk about Chick-fil-A a lot. Their golden sweetness of diet lemonade. Oh my goodness. I'm in heaven when I can get one of those. And because I talk about it, when people go to Chick-fil-A, they're like, oh, Alison goes here. Alison loves it. Or they're on social media and they see a funny post of Chick-fil-A and they send it to me. Find ways that can connect you to something familiar that your customers will see consistently, and you're going to be top of mind with them as well. Number 9, look for ways to move your story offline. Warby Parker did it with their cleaning cloths, and I did it with a piece of Laffy Taffy. In all of my orders, I would ship a smile because they've got their little jokes on it and a little bit of sugar. So what can you do to help your people better understand who you are as a business and why they should continue to love you and your brand? Number 10, just write. It does not have to be perfect. And then if you've heard me talking lately, especially in my group, all of these chat AIs that are coming out, all of the stuff that's helping us to be able to write better, this technology, the AI, oh my gosh, it's brilliant. I've been taking my chicken scratch writing notes, some of my stories, plopping them into the open AI, and it creates stories for me. It fills in the gaps. It knows where to put commas and knows where to put periods and all of the things that if you're not a grammar nerd, it helps you do. And it can help, you can write in, elongate the story or shorten the story. And it gives you a great place to allow yourself to just get that idea out without having to go into your 12th grade English grammar class brain. And you can just write from your heart, and the chat, the open AI is going to spit out amazing stuff. All right. I hope you love that podcast episode. Storytelling, story selling changes the game in businesses. All right. I'll see you next week. Hey, thanks for listening to the How to Sell Online podcast. Now, I have a question for you. Would you like to know the kind of products that I sold to get me on the path of online selling success? If so, I think you're absolutely going to love this. I created a free downloadable idea album just for you, and it outlines 16 products that may just shock you, that helped me to hit my first $1 million in sales. And I made it super easy. All you have to do is go to becauseicanlive.com/gift. That's becauseicanlive.com/GIFT, and I will shoot it straight to your inbox. And then last but not least, be sure to set a reminder on your calendar for next week so you can come learn even more about how you can start, launch, and grow your online store so you can put that money in your pocket where it belongs. All right, friend, I'll see you next week.